The Incredible Inspector Biggins. By Andy Ford. Episode 1. The Bicycle Murder. It was a dark, dark night as opposed to a light, light night, which is more like a dull, dull day. But later, Inspector Biggins of the gliding squad was sitting at his office desk made out of teak. As far as we can ascertain, he's the world's only inspector made out of teak. And since records began, only 3 other police officers were discovered to be constructed from wood or wood-related products.
So, what did it all mean?
He thought to himself.
They found a bicycle at the murder scene, but no tire marks on the soil. This is going to be a difficult case to break.
But to his surprise and delight, as soon as he dealt it one blow, the case fell apart.
Obviously, cheap materials went into the making of that particular suitcase.
His coffee was getting cold, so he decided to take it out of the fridge freezer and place it in the microwave. 2 minutes later, there it was, still in the microwave, at exactly the same temperature as it had entered.
I think I'm going to have to heat this coffee up.
He thawed in a Midwalian accent, which was strange, as he was Devonian and had been so since birth. 1 minute later, reheated coffee in hand, he moved back to his desk when suddenly his alarm went off. This shook the unshakable detective, and the newly hot coffee seemed to throw itself out of the cup and onto the photo of his beloved Natasha, the girl he loved and lost. But to this day, Francis missed her terribly, and so did Inspector Biggins, whose first name was First. First became agitated as he mopped the spilt hot beverage from the picture.
I am becoming agitated,
he thought in his own accent. It was less than 7 hours since the murder of a very minor celebrity and Brit News newscaster Goldie Digger had been committed, and he had no more idea of who the culprit could be than he did when he first discovered the body, wrapped in copies of Heat magazine. How ironic, as the magazines didn't keep the corpse warm at all. What a waste of a young life. She had it all in front of her. True, she was only reading the news on a 2-bit satellite channel, but there was something about her. The way her cute button nose would twitch just before she handed over to the weatherman, and who could forget the way that she used to sign off at the end of each broadcast.
Stay safe, keep your nose clean, and live every day like it's your last.
Who could have done this? She seemed almost too good to be true. People said she made Goody Two-Shoes look like Baddie One Sandal. But she must have upset someone.
Inspector Biggins! Inspector Biggins!
Someone said twice.
Do you have a moment?
It was the beautiful female police officer assigned to the case. Her name was Lola. She was a showgirl, with yellow feathers in her hair and her dress cut down to there. She was also a dedicated law enforcer, and she adored First with a passion, and if she could get her wicked way with him, she'd plan to adore him with a passion fruit. Kinky was her middle name. Her parents were so obviously hippies.
Of course, Lola. Just give me a second to rub this wet cloth over Natasha.
I wish he'd rub a wet cloth over me.
The young buxom female officer said under her breasts. Sometimes, for no reason at all, she could take to standing on her head. Well, c'est la vie, as they say in Wolverhampton.
There's been a development, Inspector.
A development?
The occasionally incontinent detective replied.
Wait, steady on there. I've been dry for 3 years now. What kind of development?
Well, it's more of a mini estate than a development, I suppose. Oh, but there should be enough houses to help drastically reduce the waiting list of local people requiring shelter.
Okay. But no news on our murder inquiry, Lola?
I'm afraid not.
As she said this, she did her famous impression of a tattered old piece of rope. I'm afraid not. For God's sake, do I have to spell out every gag? At this point, the inspector wondered why the narrator was infiltrating the storyline with witty contributions of his own. Lola undid a button on her blouse. Then another, and another. Eventually, they were all undone. This made it much easier for her to put on.
That's better. I think it's important for you to wear a top at work, Lola.
Lola said nothing, but soon he realized that she was staring rather intently at the photo taken at the crime scene.
What is it, Lola? What have you seen? Is it a clue? Have you remembered something? What's drawing you in? Did I miss anything? Will you take your blouse off again?
Brakes! Look, Inspector, the bicycle has no brakes, so it probably wasn't ridden by the killer. It would have been too dangerous.
Yeah, and too uncomfortable. Look, there's no saddle. Does this rule out the bike as part of the murder riddle? And if so, how did the murderer get there?
First, decided to switch on the television to see the angle that the press were giving to his current investigation. As it happened, the sports news was currently being aired, and the detective lost himself for a fleeting moment in the desperate importance of the Blue Square Conference League. Soccer, but not as we know it. Then, suddenly it happened. Newsflash. The bicycle murder story was all over the nation, live. The ruggedly handsome, fair-haired reporter was a soft-spoken Yorkshireman, almost a contradiction, some might say, but not necessarily everyone. We at Scarlet News have an exclusive from a gentleman who was cycling by at the time of the murder of Miss Digger, proclaimed the 5'6" reporter. His name is Dennis, but his friends call him Dennis Squared. Dennis, can you tell us, in your own words, what occurred?
Indeed I can, Damien. I was cycling down this cycle path, as one does, when I heard a screaming and a gnashing of teeth. Realising I was tuned to Radio 4 and the archers were still airing, I immediately switched my radio off. It was then that I saw it. At first, I thought it was some kind of medieval ritual, but then I realised exactly what was happening. My blood ran cold. Not literally, obviously, or I would have died, and consequently I wouldn't be here to recount this almost incredulous story. He looked like he was 8 foot tall, but this could have been a trick of the light. You know how the light plays tricks. In reality, it was only about 7 foot 12, and he looked very powerful, dressed as a very tall, dark-haired Boy Scout. The lady, and I use the word lady to describe the fact that she was of the female persuasion, stood motionless at first, but eventually she moved, and was to all intents and purposes moving. He grabbed her. She pushed him away. Then he pushed the slender frame against a tree. Annoyed by this, she pushed his frame against another tree. At first, both the frames would have made perfect mounts for treasured photos, but now they were destroyed. Oh, the folly of man. The two of them stood together in the dimming light, arguing, shouting, screaming, in fact. It was then that they saw me.
You mean the killer and Miss Digger both looked at you? Did either of them speak to you?
Yes, the lady said go away, and the man said stay.
So let me get this quite clear. Goldie Digger wanted you to go, but the supposed murderer wanted you to stay.
Most definitely.
Well, on that bombshell, it's Damien Tabloid, handing you back to the studio. The reporter smiled smugly, knowing that this scoop would finally get him the position with the TV company that he'd been hankering after for so long. First was dumbfounded. This made no sense at all. It was more confusing than Peter Andre's success. Lola could see that the inspector needed a moment alone to think, so she exited stage left through the door that conveniently linked their two offices. He sat down, as if waiting for his eureka moment. But it didn't come. He thought long and hard about the significance of the broadcast. He couldn't let that snivelling, tacky little reporter get one over on him and solve this mystery. First, never forgave Damien for broadcasting important secret information on the chicken farm scandal. He was certainly not a man to trust, but the public believed in him, much to the annoyance of the local police and Inspector Biggins in particular. Oh yes, the chicken farm scandal. That really left the inspector with egg on his face, feathers down the front of his trousers, and chicken feed nestling in every nook and cranny of his ample frame. Damien Tabloid didn't even use the customary journalist police officer etiquette and asked for permission to film the detective as he rolled around in the barnyard dirt searching for clues and stuff. Worse still, the brazen journalist widened the shot to include Lola's naked body in the near distance. Apparently she had slipped on some chicken shit and her clothes fell off. Well, that experience with Tabloid certainly left a nasty taste in the inspector's mouth, and he knew that he'd never forget that hack.
But that's all in the past. I've got to focus on now. Lola, can you come in here?
She entered with jiggling cleavage.
What was the name of that passerby again?
Dennis Squared, sir.
Well, I want to know everything about Mr. Squared, Lola. Where he lives, his sexual preferences, his political affiliation, inner leg measurement, whether he can eat a fruit pastel without chewing it. Is he of mixed race? Does he like mixed fruit? Is he mixed up? Does he find Tesco value pasta slightly chewy? Everything. Let's leave no stone unturned. Let's be thorough and ruthless. After we've unturned every stone, let's not even put them back the right way up. I want to ruffle a few feathers.
Like you did on the chicken farm scandal, sir.
Just do it, Lola.
Like I did on the chicken farm scandal,
I'll
sir.
bring him to his knees.
Oh, like you did to me.
Enough. There's detectiving to be done.
And he made for the coffee machine. Scene 2, a transport cafe. It was 9:30 p.m., and in the transport cafe on the 838, a long-distance lorry driver was having a mixed grill and cappuccino. This would normally come to $11.36, but with his loyalty discount it was only $10.97. Nigel Hardley loved his mixed grill, and so did the lorry driver that we're talking about in this story. His name was Trevor Degenerate. He was 47 years of age and had 3 disastrous marriages behind him, and who knows how many ahead. He was thick-set in his body and brain, and certainly not the sort of guy you wanted to argue with or disturb when he was halfway through his dinner. But that is exactly what happened on this particular night. A long-legged and painfully attractive woman, dressed almost entirely in clothes, appeared at the table.
Do you have a light, big boy?
Come to think of it, my son is quite big, but doesn't weigh that much.
What?
Sorry, my egg is slightly overcooked.
Do you think you could light my cigarette for me, honey?
Bin swear, Fräulein.
Oh, where have you been all my life?
Shopping.
Shopping?
Shopping. Are you in some kind of trouble, mademoiselle?
Well, it all depends what you mean by trouble. What do you mean by trouble?
Well, I mean, trouble.
Oh, I see. Trouble. No, I'm fine. No, but let's talk about you. Oh, what a sausage. And look at them perfectly fried mushrooms. You don't half know how to choose an all-day breakfast.
It's a mixed grill.
Oh, keep your hair on, Taffy. I don't know why I bothered to come in here. I really don't.
An extraordinary hush enveloped the cafe, and the woman turned and left. Trevor hardly looked up, and Nigel hardly wasn't there. Scene 3. Biggins' office. Inspector Biggins re-entered the office, coffee in hand. Slowly but very carefully, he transferred what he could of the hot liquid into a paper cup, as he was worried about superficially burning the skin on his palms. Soon Lola would return with news of their convenient witness, Dennis Squared, and until that time there was always Tonight with Trevor McDonald to watch. First must have dozed off, because when Lola woke him, he realized that he was dribbling profusely. He produced a tissue, almost from nowhere, and started mopping up.
Why does the mouth do that? It's so irresponsible.
He thought, but didn't say out loud, as he was hoping that Lola hadn't spied the moisture excretion.
Inspector, Dennis Squared is a communist, an atheist, an S&M pervert, a bigamist, a part-time traffic warden, and a bicycle seat sniffer.
But so are lots of people, my dear, dear Lola.
And he supports Arsenal.
The bastard! Let's nail him!
The first thing First wanted to know was why Squared had taken this route home, and whether it was his usual direction.
I've got a sneaking suspicion.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I got some tiger balm in the car. Maybe if I applied it liberally,
The
I
thing
could get it
is,
at your...
Lola, I think it's all too convenient. I mean, what if Squared was the murderer?
Lola stepped back in amazement, and 3 blouse buttons pinged.
Steady on, Inspector. You've no evidence to prove this theory at all.
But Lola, I do have a notion.
And I have a lotion. Let's go a rubbing.
Sorry?
Oh, I said that out loud, didn't I?
It's time for stage 2. I assume you know where he works. Woman Constable Thigh Rub.
Lola was stunned, as first Relly used her surname.
Indeed I do. He's a security officer for the Early Learning Centre, when he's not partaking of his main hobby.
Well, let's speak to his work colleagues. Put the pressure on a bit. Rattle a few cages. Make life uncomfortable. Ask the difficult questions. Lean on him. Play the good cop, bad cop. I want to know if he normally went home that way.
Consider it done, you hunk of masculinity.
She thought. Thank God he didn't hear that, as a distraction was the last thing he needed, and so was a milky coffee with whiskey. In fact, that was the last thing he always had before Betty buys.
Before you go, Lola, tell me a bit more about this hobby of Mr. Square.
The inspector was scarcely able to mask his intrigue. Lola sat down opposite the inspector with legs slightly apart, and so were hers.
Well, sir, he does it mostly at the weekends.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, because I know people who've seen him go round
No,
the
he
corner.
don't
You
do
know where
it.
that
Is that
place
right?
was?
He poured himself a scotch, and the conversation looked set to continue for a while.